Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade, Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons, and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Dr. Jade Teta. I'm your host of the Next Level Human podcast. And today we have Juliana Tafur with me today. She is the director of the Bridging Differences program at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. And her research and her focus is really on social connections, especially across the lines of race, religion, and yes, politics. Obviously, we're coming up here in the United States on our 2024 presidential election. And this is one of the reasons that I wanted to have Juliana on the program. And Juliana, I'm just going to set us up really quickly with the first sort of question and comment. But from my perspective, and I'm just wanting you to educate me on all this and all of us on this, from my perspective, it does seem that a lot of people are a little bit more afraid, a little bit more in their base level selves. There's a lot of divisive language and dehumanization going on from, the political spectrum. And it really is for a podcast and a company called Next Level Human, it's concerning for me because from my perspective, we are all team human. All humans suffer. This is our common sort of way that we connect. And it really is interesting to me that we continue to struggle with this idea that we cannot just see each other as our fellow humans and accept our differences and move into a place of appreciation and learning the fact that we're different and we have different views. So help me understand, what does your research say about why do we continually run into this problem? Is it getting worse from your perspective? I know I saw a stat from your organization that essentially says 3 out of 4 Americans would like a less polarized situation. And they do feel that this is a problem, but it seems like we are having a very difficult time doing that. And so get us caught up on what is this problem. And then I want to just really quiz you and understand what I can be doing better personally to connect to people who differ from me, and what we all can be doing to be better next level humans.
Thank you, Dr. Jade. All of that was beautifully said. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the podcast. So yes, you said it. 3 out of 4 Americans have recognized this is a serious problem and want to do something about it and want to live in a less polarized country. So that goes hand in hand with, yes, we live in neighborhoods that reflect our political beliefs. We're less likely to marry across political party lines. And a rhetoric, a narrative that may be common in our own lives. We're even ending relationships over political disagreements. Yeah. But all of that said, we like to stay in the hope and we like to talk about the hope, right? We know that a majority of Americans do value diverse perspectives. A lot of us, 3 out of 4 of us believe it's important to hear different political views, even when they don't agree with all of them, right? We also desire a shift in political discourse. moving beyond political hostility and divisiveness as a step forward. And believe it or not, although it doesn't seem like we are, many Americans, 3 out of 4 Americans, again, are open to learning from others and realize that they can gain insights from conversations with those that have different views from them. So I think both of those things are true. And I think we hang on to the, yes, we know it's hard, but we also know a lot of people are absolutely exhausted and really do want to be the change that they want to see in the world.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. And I guess I'll just throw this out to you a little bit. It's funny when I would consider myself politically sort of a moderate. I probably lean a little left. But when I talk to people on either side and have many friends, in fact, I feel like more of my friends lately are slightly on the right, but they're still more moderate. But when I sort of see this issue, I see that there's distrust. And when I get on, and I know we all do this, but because I'm a student of psychology and philosophy, and really I think of politics as the philosophy of, sort of how to run cultures, I'm interested in what people are saying. And of course, social media can be a very divisive place. But I'm struck by the idea that when I read comment sections and things like that, there's this extreme distrust that you seem to see with people on the left for the right. They just do not trust that they're honest and good humans sometimes, and vice versa on the other side. It's almost just like this profound distrust that is going on. And I'm wondering, from my perspective, what is causing that, or what has your research shown is causing that? Is it because of we're all in our information bubbles? Is it because we're all buying into one way of seeing it? How do we make sense of why this is happening? What has started this issue?
Yeah, well, it's a variety of things. As we all know, social media and social media algorithms end up showing us only what we believe, what we want to see. And that ends up informing what we think the world is and how we think everyone thinks, which is a huge problem because we also know that 10% of the loudest voices on social media are the most extreme. And that's sad because it's only 10%, right? What happens to everyone else? But those are the ones that end up being amplified. And before we know it, we have this sense of reality that is really not reality. Also, like demographic shifts in the country across the board in different states have led people to be fearful of newcomers, of the other, of changing makeups of our society. And that rhetoric of fear, unfortunately, is used by politicians also to divide us. So I think we have to take back the narrative as a society and say, this is not who we are. I rather be a good human. I rather be kind to my neighbor. I rather extend a helping hand to someone who might need me. And I rather work from a mindset that is not a scarcity mindset. There is enough to go around. And like you said, we are interdependent and are one. We truly depend on each other across our differences, all of our differences, because collaboration is needed to reach important or to meet important tasks, to join in common goals, and to function, right? So oftentimes we are drawn into these narratives without stopping and really having a moment to understand how interdependent we are and how much we need to work across our differences to function as a society.
Yeah, what's funny about that? When I hear you talk, I mean, certainly I share those values, right? I share these values of inclusivity and integration and holism, and certainly compassion and kindness are high up on my value hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I talk to some of my friends who are and I don't have many extremes on either side, but when I talk to my friends who differ from me a little bit, what I found is their value hierarchies are slightly different than mine. So, for example, they might have freedom as a higher value hierarchy than compassion, for example. And so for me, I've found that oftentimes we can get a little bit confused because I might go to my friend, well, you don't have compassion. When it's not that they don't have compassion, it's that freedom comes first and compassion is 5 steps down on their value hierarchy. It's still a value of theirs. It's just not as high up as mine. And I found that when I'm having these conversations, I feel like a lot of it is this misunderstanding of where the values are. I might be talking about compassion and they're talking about freedom. And then we miss each other in this dialogue. And I'm wondering if your research has uh, elucidated this or has anything to say about this. How can we, sort of talk with people if our value hierarchies are so different? And is this even a thing?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Why is it that we humans can't change when we want to change something? Why is it that when we want to change our health and fitness, when we want to be better with our finances, when we want to be better in personal relationships or find love, or we want to find meaning and have a life that makes more of a difference for ourselves and others, why is it that it's so hard to change? Well, the answer to that is because the entire industry of coaching and change psychology is built on willpower and habit change. And habit change and willpower can never work for one simple reason. It's our identities that drive how motivated we are, and it's our identity that drives our habits. In other words, if we change our identity, habits and motivation flow from that automatically. But if we try to approach it from a willpower, habit place first, we run into a dead end every single time. Now, every time you listen to this podcast, you hear about the 4 jobs every human must do. We must manage our finances and career. We must manage our health and fitness. We must give and receive love. And we must find our purpose and our meaning. We need to matter and make a difference as humans. The Next Level Human coaching format helps you finally begin to embark on identity restructuring, to teach you how to reprogram the old stories that keep you stuck and tethered to an old identity. I am inviting you to get involved with the brand new Next Level Human coaching platform. You can now be coached by myself and other Next Level Human trained coaches to finally begin to take advantage of this new science of quantum metabolism and identity restructuring. To get involved, all you have to do is go to www.nextlevelhuman.com/human-coaching. That's www.nextlevelhuman.com/human-coaching. And we will finally get you the change you've been looking for. I hope to see you there soon.
Absolutely. It is a thing. And I appreciate you mentioning it, having noticed it, right? There is research around this. And I just want to say at the Greater Good Science Center, we are translators of the research to practice. So a lot of the research doesn't originate within the Greater Good Science Center, but we are really good at taking the research and making it translatable and applicable to people's lives and for practitioners to use and help others. So this research that I'll mention is Jonathan Haidt's. He
one of my favorites.
Great. Okay. So he came up with a concept along with other colleagues called moral reframing. So the idea is that, yes, like you named it, oftentimes we are talking about the issues that matter to us, but from the lens of our values and not the values of the people we're speaking to. And we often give our own reasons, but we forget that the people who we're talking to might not share our own values, right? And moral reframing is all about kind of tuning into the values that guide the other person or the other group, if you will, and then speaking to those values so that what you're trying to say comes across better, is better understood by the other side or by the other person. And you are right that we value different things across the political spectrum, right? We know that, for example, Republicans or people who are more conservative tend to consider values like loyalty, authority, sanctity more important, whereas liberals tend to emphasize or value more things like harm, care, fairness. And obviously, this is not to say that anyone on either side doesn't care about any of these things. So, general kind of assumption, grouping lots of people into these categories. But in general terms, this is what their research points to.
Yeah, so that's really this to me is where perhaps I want to know how to have these conversations. So what would this look like? So if I'm talking to my friend, is the way to connect with them to essentially say, "Oh, I understand, freedom, let's say, is something that you deeply care about." And, begin to have a discussion around understanding their framing of freedom versus compassion. Like I know for me, compassion is it's way high up
Mm-hmm.
on my value hierarchy, right? To
Mm-hmm.
me, I see compassion. Without compassion, I don't know how, society functions. But I know that from some of my friends, they just don't see it the way I see it. They see it almost like, being compassionate without boundaries, let's say, is foolishness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this idea of trying to understand where they think, like they might see compassion as weakness, where I
Mm-hmm.
see it as a strength. And so I'm wondering, how do we then have these conversations? What's the first, if we're playing human chess, let's say, well, not to win, but to connect and just have fun playing the game? What's the first move that we make? Is it to essentially say, "Oh, I understand, you see freedom as, a very important thing. I agree. Freedom is important." And then to begin to have the discussion around that. And if that is the way to do it, like then do we lose ourselves in our own values by trying to, just revolve the conversation around theirs? I'm wondering how we can have these conversations, especially in the next week as we're all talking politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you would start with simple questions like
Mm,
what values are most important to you,
mm,
or what experiences have shaped those values,
mm,
right? And then you would understand like what and how their values might overlap or differ from your own.
mm,
You absolutely do not have to agree, and you are not leaving your values aside
mm,
when you frame things around what matters to them.
mm,
This is only about you speaking their, quote unquote language, right?
mm,
Like using the way they see the world to frame an argument. Um, and this is not to either manipulate the outcome or like, right? It's just so they understand that you are doing your best to connect at a deep level with what matters to them and frame ideas around what matters to them. So I think some of those examples that you gave are a good place to start, but this is just one of many skills to kind of start conversations and even to get yourself ready for conversations. So we can talk a little bit more about like different skills at the intrapersonal level, at the interpersonal level, and then at the intergroup level if you're actually a practitioner bringing folks together.
Yeah, I love this idea. And it strikes me that if you're gonna have these conversations and either come into a conversation, it's almost as if, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's almost as if if I want to decrease polarization, I have to essentially take that on and almost put that above any other goal set, right? Where it's like, okay, well, I am going to be the example. I'm going to be the next level human in the conversation. I want to set the example that I am going to take on polarization because I think it is a major problem, let's say. And therefore, I put that goal, if I put that goal set as number one, then I am going to be far more likely to remember when I'm in these conversations to connect with that goal in mind versus connecting with the goal of winning in mind or proving my point being in mind. It's almost just like if I want to decrease polarization, from my perspective, the first move always is to not divide, degrade, dehumanize the person I'm talking with or make them seem or put them in a combative mode. I want to listen to them first, which seems like what you were saying, so that I can understand where they're coming from, so that I can have a far more impactful and useful conversation.
Yeah. Well, I want to, given kind of your audience as well, I want to stress that we know that bridging differences is good for health and safety. We know that prejudices about the quote unquote other end up elevating stress and can compromise immune systems. So if you took it from like the health perspective, this is good for you, right? So it's one thing to make like a rational decision about there's polarization, I want to do something, which seems like a civic orientation, right? To me, like this is what we must do as a society. But if you want to take it from like a more personal and maybe selfish reason, right? It's not good for you. So what are strategies to be able to live, coexist, collaborate, cooperate, right, with people who are different from you? And then you set an intention and go for it. So there's that. And then there's also like, what is bridging differences, right? Which is like an important framing definition to get to as well. So from a more spiritual side, it starts with kind of acknowledging and recognizing that another person has their own needs, values, goals, just like you do. They're just different from you, right? And it comes with, again, this recognition that without that, constructive dialogue, problem solving is just not possible. It doesn't happen without it. And knowing that when you are entering a conversation to bridge differences, you are not trying to convince the other person of your viewpoint, or even necessarily you're kind of walking into the conversation with the intent to build consensus, right? This is not synonymous with compromise. And I think it's really important for people to understand that. And it's also important to understand, back to your point about like, do I have to leave my values aside? Absolutely not. We start off from the place of who we are, what matters to us, what identity we represent, and then from that point forward, we go bridge. And we bridge when we're safe enough to bridge too, right? If we are being disrespected against, or if our identity is or right to exist is being questioned, then we wouldn't recommend that you enter a conversation or collaboration where you are attempting to bridge differences.
Okay. Yeah. So this might be one of the most important things you've said so far then. So I just want to repeat sort of where we are. Like what I heard you just say is that you should never go into these conversations with the idea of convincing or trying to win. So this might be, one rule that we could put down right now. And that to me seems pretty striking, because I do think that most people who are not being fully aware will have the natural default to pull the trigger of, I will defend and convince, right? And so, this is one of the first things that I've heard you say that's most important, right? We have to put aside the need to convince other people. We also said we have to make sure we know our values, but we don't need to, for lack of a better term, shove them down other people's throat. We can be firm in our values, and by understanding someone else's values doesn't mean we are, giving up our own values. And so there's this idea of these seem like priming steps almost, where it's like, okay, if I'm going to enter into this conversation, I know my goal set isn't to win and convince. And if I'm going to end up, and my goal set isn't to make someone take on my values, and certainly I don't need to give up my values, I can simply just walk in and be able to connect. And what would be the goal then? Is it just to learn. And, from, you talked about this idea of like from an individual sort of perspective. Yes, it's healthier for us, but are there other ways that we can frame this? Like, what are we gaining from this? From my perspective, I love to learn. I want to understand. So, that's going to help me certainly go. I'm not here to debate and win. I'm here to learn and connect. And so it sounds like there's a whole set of whole bunch of goal sets and orientations that we can enter into conversations with other people with that are very different than the other thing where I'm going to try to win. There is this thing though that I want to ask you about, because that's very different, I think anyway, and maybe you'll educate me on this. That's very different if it's me and you, Juliana, right? Like, I meet you, we're talking, we're sitting down having coffee, and it's two individuals having a conversation about our differences in wanting to learn. And I do feel like on an individual level, I feel like almost everybody you'll find commonality with, and you can have a nice conversation one-on-one. But it seems to me that as soon as we get into the social media realm, we forget ourselves. As soon as we get into group think, we forget ourselves. And so is there any additional things we need to think about when we start to dialogue in groups or when we start to dialogue within social media?
We'll be back after a quick break.
I want to talk to you about the coaching profession. Now, I know many of you listening are in the coaching profession or are healthcare providers, people like functional medicine docs, nutritionists, nurse practitioners, and others. And if you are, you probably have some of the frustrations that come along with doing that work. For example, how do we as coaches make true change for our clients? We know that information is not transformation, and we know that the models that we use are inadequate in many ways. If we just look at health and fitness, for example, 90+% of individuals trying to get healthy or lose weight, we know they fail, or they end up worse in the long run. And oftentimes this is the case even for people who are doing financial coaching or relationship coaching as well. Why though? Why is this the case? It happens to be that way because we are operating in a very old model when it comes to coaching. Currently, the coaching world is dominated by habit science and willpower strategies. But habits simply can't make the change we want them to because they are a consequence of our identity. In other words, habits flow out of identity. They don't create our identity. And there is a brand new science that explains exactly what the element and elements are that are going to create massive change through this identity restructuring. Quantum metabolism is the beginning of this new science. And no, this is not quantum mysticism. This is quantum metabolism. And this is the way that our biochemistry, our physiology sits on top of an energetic body. We now know that the biofield is real. Science has discovered and measured the old chakra systems. In other words, science is telling us that we can impact our physical body and our brain through the mental, emotional space of this biofield. Most of us think that habits drive change, but there's something below habitual actions, and that is our identity. And so in addition to this quantum metabolism and this identity restructuring technique, we can now begin to make drastic changes in behavior as a result of impacting this field. Now, I'm going to be training coaches in this new science of quantum metabolism and the techniques of identity restructuring so that we can finally have a model that is going to work for coaches and their clients and patients. And I would like to invite you to get involved. I am now taking individuals on the wait list for the Next Level Human coaching certification. If you'd like to get involved, all you have to do is go to www.nextlevelhuman.com/human-coach. That's www.nextlevelhuman.com/human-coach. Once you get there, I'm going to give you a free training to get you started and give you a taste of what this certification is going to be like. I hope I will see you there.
Yeah, social media is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge that, as you probably well know, it is much harder to have constructive dialogue when we have a screen between us, and when we're hiding behind those screens, sometimes with names and pictures that don't represent us. So,
And
um,
sometimes we're not even talking to a human, which I just read Yuval Noah Harari's new book, Nexus, which is fantastic for anyone. And he goes through a lot of this, right? Sometimes we're not even dialoguing with humans, and these bots are antagonistic, almost trying to stir up, you know, the flame. And, obviously the algorithms are such that they want people's attention, and certainly creating divisive, dehumanizing sort of actions can do that. But I'm
yeah.
just wondering if the Greater Good Science Center has looked at any of this science and is seeing a different way of handling it, or do the rules still apply? Go in with a charitable mindset. Go in with the idea that I want to connect. Go in with the idea that I want to learn something. Go in with the idea that I'm not trying to win an argument.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the rules still apply.
Mm.
And the work that we put out, a lot of it is to allow individuals to decide for themselves that they want to be better, that they want to do better, that they want a better society, right? So I also want to emphasize this notion of humility, which I know is a value that a lot of people do appreciate as well, right? Like this idea that we can't go about the world thinking that no one can teach us anything, that
Mm.
our view of the world is so right, and they are so wrong, right? And so just an invitation to accept that we don't have all the answers or a monopoly on the truth. Like, how can you hate when you get to know someone? How can you hate when you understand that they are a product of their lived experience that is maybe very different from yours? And when you get down to stories and personal narratives, then you're connecting with what matters. And I think Brené Brown said it best. She said, "You can't hate up close."
Mm. Yeah, I
And I
think that's
just
exactly
want us
right.
to, even in social media interactions, to attempt to get to the story under the story, right? What we see typically in social media is the issue, like right on our face, right? What this person believes, or the news story that the person is sharing, or emoji, or not emoji, GIF, or whatever. And sometimes that comes across as in our face, but we really have not had the opportunity to get to the story under the story, to understand, why does this matter so deeply to them? What is it that they may be fearful of? Like, fear is at the core of a lot of this, or distrustful towards, right? I know you mentioned trust at the beginning of our conversation. Like, trust is hard to win over, especially when we're starting from a very polarized place. And sometimes when we do this bridging work, we also have to acknowledge and recognize that getting to liking might be enough and okay, right? Like, maybe we don't get to full trust, and that's okay. So also recognizing that this work is also about small shifts over time. Even if you're starting with, I may like you now, right? And then maybe you get to know the person better over a series of encounters, and maybe you get into a place where you can actually trust them. But don't expect that to be the default and what happens from the get-go.
Well, and the other thing is, and you kind of alluded to this, but I do think what people need to understand, and I think any human, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, maybe barring the absolute extremes of people who, just really want to cause distress and dysfunction in
Mhm.
society, I do think it's really important for us to understand that nobody is served by tearing other people down. Eventually, it's like people like to think about our society, and tell me what you think about this, but people like to think about our society. I see it as they like to think of it as a hierarchy, right? It's like we're climbing ladders. And
Mm.
what happens is I call them the base level extremes on either side. What they seem to want to do is when they're on this ladder, they want to kick the people who are below them down, and they want to pull the people who are above them down. And so it's just sort of like this motto that seems to be like me against the world. But I would call that the base level type of approach. And I don't think most of us are like that. I do think, though, that most of us are a culture level approach where we're climbing the ladders and we see all the people with the red shirts who are on our team, and we go, I'm going to help them, or, and I'm going to pull the people down from the blue side. It seems that once we get in groups, we do this. I think the next level human approach is to stop seeing ourselves on a hierarchy of ladders and instead to see ourselves as an ecosystem. It's like the lion is not the king of the jungle because he or she cannot survive without the bees and the beavers. And if we destroy the bees and the beavers, we end up ultimately destroying ourselves. And I feel like humans have not yet figured this out. This divisive, dehumanizing type of language that is being used on both sides, from my perspective, is not good. But I do have a question here too. I want to see if you agree with that. Sort of, is that a better framing from your perspective? And then two, an immediate question comes up though that goes, well, this idea of moral equivalency that people really get caught up on, and they just go, well, as soon as you say it's on both sides, you're negating the fact that perhaps it's worse on one side or the other. And I want to know how you handled this idea of moral equivalencies, where people tend to go, well, it's just because we're hearing someone, we don't have to see this as a moral equivalence. What happens when it is, essentially one side, quote, doing more to harm the ecosystem than the other? And how would we even determine that? Because I know people get caught up on that, where they're like, I have to stand up for this because it's destructive and one side is worse than the other. This is the mindset that we get in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot to cover there.
Yeah, a whole lot.
Yeah. I just want to say, yes, to address your point on kind of the groups that we create. I just want to acknowledge that developmentally, right, we used to be in tribes, in our own groups, and anyone who was an outsider was a threat to our group, and we needed to be fearful of them for survival, for protecting ourselves and our kind, or our kin. And that is no longer the case, right? We are no longer in those groups, but the mentality of protecting your own and fear of the other perseveres. And we need to shift that. We are no longer those people who we were, right? We are evolved, hopefully more evolved beings, and on the path to compassion, to love, to acceptance, to care, despite our differences, right? So just want to acknowledge that. And you also named like our group versus the other, and kind of like pushing one down and the other one up. Like, it doesn't have to be that way, right? So a really good strategy or skill, science-based skill for beginning to tap into what unite us is finding shared identities. So looking beyond our differences and really doing our best to identify larger and kind of inclusive connections that we might have with others. So the idea is that we are more likely, research points to us being more kind and more understanding towards others when we see them as part of a larger group. And I'll talk a little bit about the science around this to give you a concrete example. So there's a study out of the UK that was researching Manchester United fans. And the Manchester United fans in the first part of the study were asked to think about their group as Manchester United fans. So the wins of Manchester United, the fandom of Manchester United, etc. And then they were sent across a parking lot where they came across with someone who was apparently injured. And this person was at times wearing a Manchester United jersey, and at times they were wearing a Liverpool jersey, the rival team's jersey. And then the study was repeated. And the study was repeated taking, again, Manchester United fans. And in this case, they were made to think about soccer fandom. So what they had in common with other soccer fans, their appreciation for the sport, etc. And the same thing happened. They were sent across a parking lot, a person injured, sometimes wearing a Manchester United shirt and sometimes wearing a Liverpool shirt. And what's interesting in what happened was that in the first study, when they were sent across, they helped. Let me pull up the science. I just want to make sure I say this correctly. So pause me there for a second.
Yeah, and it's making sense to me because my guess would be that in the first condition where they were primed to think of themselves as Manchester United fans, they would be more likely to help the Manchester United jersey wearing person. But it seems to me that when you're primed to think of yourself as a soccer fan, that is no longer going to become an issue. You'll probably help at an equal level no matter what soccer jersey they're wearing. So that's what I would guess the hypothesis would show. So am I right? Close on that?
No, you're absolutely right. I just want to give you the exact numbers.
Mm.
So it turns out that when they were 4 times more likely to help the person in need if the person was wearing a Manchester United jersey than if they were wearing the jersey of the rival team. Yep. 4 times more likely. So this just goes to show that finding shared identities can truly dictate how well we treat people. But it also goes to show that this is an internal shift that we can all do when we try to understand what is it that we might have in common with folks that may be more important than this difference that is made so apparent and so threatening, right? So I just want us to remember that, because at the end of the day, as we kind of move towards the election as well, are there things as Americans that we value that we can kind of rally around, like our belief in service to community, our belief in belonging in the spaces where we are, our belief in democracy. And that's actually one latest finding from research, that we can all get around regardless of where we stand politically. We value democracy. That is something we all value. And so yeah, just an invitation to see beyond. And that's like at the macro level. But then we can connect with, are we fans of a soccer team, right? We can connect with, do we go to the same church? Do we serve in the same food pantry? Whatever it is, right? Like there are these smaller kind of everyday connections. Or can we connect as parents, right? With like similar experiences with raising kids, right? So there are so many things that we can find that we can connect with others on. And from that shared identity, we begin to work backwards.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of too. If you look at we've these big movements in history, makes me think of Nelson Mandela, makes me think of Martin Luther King, makes me think of Mahatma Gandhi, and some of these big movements that were up against incredible odds. It seems to me what they did was, Martin Luther King did not necessarily focus on black versus white. He focused on agape love. We're all human. Let's all love each other. That was sort of the message. Nelson Mandela wasn't talking about black and white South Africans. He was talking about South Africa. He even used, the rugby team as a way to unite all South Africans. And so this, to me, we have evidence for this in very big movements across the world. And I love what you're saying as aspiring next level humans, this idea that we need to learn the skill of connecting on sort of micro levels, where it's like, me and you are both interested in psychology research and that kind of stuff. And we can vibe on that, right? And we can vibe on different areas, and we need to understand that. But I think we lose that we need to keep going up the level when we are dealing in bigger groups. And to me, one of the things I've focused on is I just go, we all suffer. Like, this is a Buddhist principle, right? It's like, if there's one thing that we can say, I know this about Juliana, she knows it about me. We've never met before. I know it about all you listeners. You know it about us. Every single human has a story of suffering. And so from my perspective, when I think about loving my fellow human, I go, I know you've suffered. And in that, I can find a compassionate place. But as soon as I just go, I'm American and you're whatever you are, and and I go for American exceptionalism or whatever. If I'm talking to an American, sure, like I can vibe. And don't you love being American? Yes, I love being an American too. But if I'm talking to someone outside of America, instead of othering them, I can just essentially go, oh, we're all now human. Sometimes I wish, Juliana, that we would just get contacted by aliens or something, because I think that might be the thing that might make us go, you know what? We better get on board that we're all humans. We're all in this together. But right now, we don't sort of have that. So let me just catch up where we are, and then we can kind of begin wrapping up. But it sounds like a couple things that now I've learned from you. Number one, this idea that we're not trying to win when we're having these discussions. Number two, we really need to develop a sense of humility. Another thing I've learned is that this idea that, guess what? Most of us don't want this polarization. That's a way that we can connect, right? Like that alone is a way that we can begin to connect with each other. And then this idea of like finding these commonalities and realizing that that is going to be the thing that tears us apart. Why can't we find, instead of searching for what makes us different, this is just a mindset of going, where are we the same? How can I connect in the same? Now, I know you guys have sort of a whole set of things that you do and teach. And I know if I'm right, you're doing a challenge on this to help people understand how to be better with this. Do you want to walk us through like some of the things that we can do and what this challenge is all about, and some of the steps that we can take on an individual level? Because I know from my perspective, I would really like to practice this, especially, during this time where we're seeing all these differences between us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So one that you can do individually, a science-based skill that you can apply more easily, is seeing the person, not the label, is what we're calling it. So when we learn personal details about others beyond their labels, all labels, but yes, in the context of politics, it's also their political labels, research points to us viewing them with more warmth. So at the level of the individual, you could start even by tricking your brain by asking yourself simple questions like, do they like broccoli or carrots? Or do they like cats or dogs? And what this does is that it allows us to truly take a step back and understand that people, even people who are different from you, have individual qualities and individual traits, and they are more than the category, right? And then if you want to take it a step further, then you would try learning something more personal about them. And this could be something about their family or hobbies, or if you're in the same company, something that they like about the job, right? And again, science shows us that when we learn personal details about those who may seem different from us, we are feeling more warmth and connection towards them. And so that's an easy one, honestly, that anyone can start today, even
You know
by
what that makes me think of? It makes me think of this idea. Like when we watch TV, like sometimes you'll even watch like a movie about like a serial killer or a show about a serial killer. And you'll watch these shows and you'll develop some sense of connection to that because you deeply understand the story. And it just makes me think you're basically saying here that understand people's stories. And when you understand people's stories, it's going to usually help you connect. I also like this idea that we can connect on the fact that we both like dogs, or we can connect on the fact that you can teach me about cats, right? Like, so it's like this idea of like, if, you and me, let's say we both like dogs. I'm like, cool, I love dogs. We start talking about dogs. But let's say I love dogs and you love cats. Then I get to connect with you to teach me about cats. And, so it's like, it sounds to me like we're just trying to connect and going deeper with that. Yeah. What else? What else? I'm curious.
So that you just mentioned is the finding shared identities, right? Like cat lovers, dog lovers, etc. Like that's a good one. Or sports team lovers. And then you were pointing to perspective taking also with like, when you see a narrative, even on television, and understand where the person is coming from, right? Like that is perspective taking. You are taking their perspective. And even if you don't engage directly with the other person, research shows that we can broaden our perspective when we just ask ourselves what experiences might have shaped their views, right? So it's not rocket science. It's very common sense, but it allows us to take some distance and to understand that maybe they're not the monster we're making them out to be. Another really good one that's a more kind of one that you can do on your own is self-distancing. So if something is really bothering you about something someone said to you or on social media, you could take a moment and notice your emotions. And instead of asking yourself, why am I so angry? You would ask yourself, why is fill in the blank, your name, in my case, Juliana. Why is Juliana so angry? What makes her so upset about this, right? Like you talk to yourself in the third person and using kind of like her and she pronouns. And it allows you to take some distance again and to understand from a little bit of a distance what you're feeling. And it allows you to almost like regain your composure so that you can again engage in conversation or approach the person for conversation, but it kind of it stops you in your impulses.
Yeah, I love that one. I'll tell you, I train coaches. We have human coaches as part of Next Level Human. And one of the things that we found most powerful in working with our clients is dimensionalizing their consciousness by either saying, hey, let's talk to your little girl, or let's talk to your little boy, or let's talk to your adolescent self, or let's talk to your future self. And then even let's talk to that emotion, right? So, internal family systems and some of these things. We use this technique and it's highly effective at getting people to understand themselves a little bit better.
Yeah, so that's a really good one. And then there's other ones that you would practice with others. If you got yourself to a place where you weren't in kind of fight or flight and you were ready to engage, then we talk about kind of listening with compassion and the importance of and power of listening with compassion, because we may enter a conversation wanting to honestly serve the other person as we listen and help them make meaning of the story and almost co-create with you. And I would hope that that's the intention of entering a conversation when you're trying to listen with compassion. But then science tells us that when we listen, just the act of us listening makes us be perceived by the other person as more trustworthy. And it also encourages our conversation partners or the people who are listening to us be more open-minded and less defensive. So just like stopping there to think and realize and recognize the power of listening and really making people see you differently just by you stopping and giving them the time of day and recognizing. Yeah.
Can I comment on that? Because I think this might be the most powerful thing that you've said, at least for me. I don't know what you listeners think, but like at least for me, because the idea is that we have this idea that we can convince and we want to convince, and we oftentimes get caught in that. And to me, what you're saying, Juliana, is so powerful. You're essentially saying that when I know this research as well, but correct me if I'm wrong on this. What I think a lot of people don't understand is the more you try to convince and tell someone they're wrong, the more they dig in their heels.
Yes.
What Juliana is, so in other words, you actually are defeating your purpose of convincing anybody of anything when you tell them they're wrong. But what Juliana is pointing us to is this idea of we don't actually have to do anything but listen. And this makes someone more likely to change their mind. What she's telling us is that when we listen from a compassionate place, people become more open and they become more, that you have the ability to influence and inspire simply by your presence of listening. I find that such a simple, powerful, beautiful aspect of being human. We don't have to it's almost like we can change people in the idea of just acting and being present versus being in people's faces.
100%.
Yeah,
That's
I love
all
that.
people need. There's a quote I love by David Augsburger, who's a theology expert. In his book, Caring Enough to Confront, he says, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. And I just want us to sit with that for a minute because it's so powerful. That's all we want. Being listened to is one of our most fundamental
I think I may have lost you,
needs.
Juliana, but if you can hear me, you may want to come off and log back in.
You're quiet. It changes the
Because you
game.
look like you're locked up on me. See if you come back. So we'll see if Juliana pops back in, because we just lost her on the feed, but hopefully she'll come back in. But I loved essentially what she was saying there, in regards to this idea of listening and compassionately listening. And I do think if we're going to listen as humans in this way, we do have to come at it from a place of there's something here for me to learn rather than there's something for me to teach. So that's where the humility piece sort of comes in for us. It's really powerful. And then just realizing that there's a story here from this person, and stories are interesting. I mean, there's no better way to connect with someone in my mind than to say to them, tell me about your story. I mean, who doesn't want to share their story, right? And I think that is a big piece of this. And this idea that when we are in this place where we have somebody sharing their story and we're listening, from that perspective, there's deep connection. There's deep connection there. So Juliana's coming back in. I was just telling him, Juliana, that just filling him in on this idea. I love this idea of just listening, because one of the things I think that's important is there's nothing more connection oriented than saying, hey, Juliana, tell me your story. Like, where are you from? Like, what are you doing? There's nothing that opens people up more than that. And so I love that aspect of things a lot. And I have to be honest, it's something that I'm not necessarily great about. I'll tell you a secret. I'm really good with, like, if I meet Juliana or if I meet any of you listeners, I'm really good at compassion and listening. But you know who I'm not good at it with is my family and my brothers and my sisters and my parents and my cousins and my aunts and uncles. It's like somehow with them, I guess because there's more history there, I can easily go back into my base level self. But yeah, Juliana, so now that I got you back, what else besides, well, you were going to tell us about this favorite quote of yours. That's where we lost you. So you want to start there?
Okay, great. Yeah, I was wondering if you had heard that part. So one of my favorite quotes of all times is by David Augsburger. He's a theology expert. In his book, Caring Enough to Confront, he says, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Breaking into the show real quick, because I want to tell you about a brand new free, absolutely free offer from Next Level Human. And you are going to love this, and it is going to give you fantastic results for your health and fitness. Right now, the research area in health and fitness is all abuzz with something called VILPA, Vigorous Intermittent Lifestyle Physical Activity, otherwise known as exercise snacks or exercise bursts. Think about it this way. You wake up in your day at 8 a.m., you do 1 or 2 minutes of intense activity. Then you go about your day. Couple hours later, you do it again. Couple hours later, again. Couple hours later, again. And maybe finally again in the evening. And what this does, this very short 1 to 3 minute intermittent bursts spread out throughout the day, give you similar benefits to your traditional intense exercise. In fact, a 2022 study in Nature Medicine found that this reduced cancer risk by 40%, cardiovascular disease by 40%. And this was just 4 bouts of 1 to 3 minute intermittent activity throughout the day. When they looked at doing more than that, up to 11 bouts, it was a 65% reduction for cardiovascular events. This is incredibly powerful. And what I wanted to do is offer this free to the Next Level Human community. All you need to do is go to drjade.com/snacks, register absolutely free to get these via email. And more importantly, all you need to do is put your text number in, your mobile number in, and we will text these to you 4 times throughout the day. Follow along intermittent workouts that you can do. These short, intense 1 to 3 minute workouts in video and audio format that you can get to your text, turn on, get them done super quick, and then be done. And the beautiful thing about this, you can do them anywhere during your day because they're so short. You do not need to sweat. You won't need to shower afterwards. This is an incredibly powerful way for us to get the physical fitness benefits that we need to keep our bodies healthy and fit. And I have seen very effective results for people with weight loss as well. So go over to drjade.com/snacks. Get these intermittent, vigorous activity snacks of 1 to 3 minutes free to your email and your text, and start getting results with your health and fitness and improving your health right now. drjade.com/snacks. I hope you really love this free service from Next Level Human. And let's get back to the show. Oh, wow. Yeah, that is super, super powerful. And how many of us can relate to that? Like 100%. Like, it's funny sometimes that when I used to date a lot, right? And I would go on these dates with individuals, and this would make itself known because I'm just someone who, when I meet someone for the first time, I just let them talk. And I'm very interested in people's stories. But there were a couple times there where she's like, that was amazing, and I'm thinking to myself, I didn't even say anything. Like, I don't know why she thinks I'm amazing. I literally said nothing. And so I do think this speaks to kind of what you're speaking about. So as we wrap up, I guess I would love to hear your final things. And then I want to hear about, this connection challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, from our other skills that we haven't talked about, I think identifying common goals. We already touched on moral reframing and kind of connecting with their values and not your values. But
what would that be like, though? Would that be like common goals of like, in politics, let's say maintaining the democracy, or common goals of, freedom of autonomy, and what is that, or is that more personal and not sort of political?
Yeah, I mean, I think we take it to the personal. Obviously, at the policy and political level, there's a lot that politics
it starts to
do to identify common goals to move forward. But at the personal level, it could be as simple as, do we care about the education system and the quality of education that kids are getting, right? That is a common goal that a lot of us can get around. And the idea is that when we identify those shared goals, especially one that identifies everyone involved, we end up putting aside our differences and cooperating. So, and then once we are cooperating on common goals, it's easier to shift our perceptions or perspectives of people from maybe, adversaries to simply collaborators, right? So I just want us to think of that too, that sometimes the best way, and depending on who you are, like, you may be called into a conversation for the sake of listening with compassion and dialogue and getting to know the other person's perspective and way of being in this world. But we won't attract everyone into bridge building and those conversations in that way. So just acknowledging that, for practitioners executing this work, oftentimes a common goal and like what is in the interest of all parties involved is a great way to begin to bring groups together, because it taps to a shared need. And it's easy to do. Like it boils down to identifying what is a goal that we share, and then kind of mapping out ways that we can collaborate and having enough moments of interaction so that we are beginning to see past our differences and are beginning to value what we each contribute to this shared goal.
Yeah, I love that idea. To me, I can almost see myself in a conversation using your example and saying, instead of saying, sounds to me like you don't care about kids, I could say, well, it looks like we're both passionate about the education of our children, right? And so, and that is not confronting and allows us to be like, oh, well, I'm saying that you care. And so now we can continue dialogue versus me, saying you don't care. And all of a sudden there's a record scratch where it's like, it turns into an argument. I love that idea.
100%. That level sets the conversation, and people feel seen when you acknowledge that you are seeing something that is also important to them, but maybe their approach to it is a little bit different from yours. So how can those approaches merge so that true collaboration and cooperation can happen. And so you can begin to change the perspective or perception of who this person previously was in your mind.
You know what else I love too, Juliana? I love the idea that having a conversation with someone, and by me showing up this way, I do think they're much more likely to show up this way in their next conversation. It reminds me of this idea when I'm walking down the trail by my house, and I like to smile at people as they pass.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, most don't smile back, right? I try to make eye contact, I try to smile at them, and most people aren't going to smile back. And I just keep doing that because part of me goes, maybe I didn't see them smile back, but I know they're going to feel that. And I also know they're far more likely to smile or be in a good mood to the next person that they pass. And I think this is part of that too. I do think that we humans want to matter and make a difference. I think most of us want to matter and make a difference. And this is a very positive way that we can do this without, having to give up our values or be different. I just love the idea of this. It's very simple to do.
Yeah.
So let me ask you with this challenge that you're doing, walk us through how this works. And is it essentially this idea that we're taking these skill sets that you've sort of educated us on, and we're just challenging ourselves to, use these for a certain amount of days, or how does this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a 7-day campaign for connection challenge. So leading up to the election, we are not campaigning for a candidate, not campaigning for the hatred, division, polarization that is hurting us, but we are campaigning for connection because we do believe that politics may divide us, but we can choose connection. So we've created 7 days of skills that we are disseminating on a daily basis. So when people sign up, they will be getting a skill a day. And each of those skills is an invitation to practice. So obviously in a day, maybe you won't get to kind of foster a relationship and collaborate on shared goals. So we're very mindful of that. So we have kind of kept it at maybe a self-reflection practice, or maybe you visualize someone in a different light, or maybe you do turn to your partner or roommate and listen to them with compassion, not necessarily on politics, right? So the idea is that we're beginning to equip folks to build the muscles to be able to do this in their everyday lives, and incrementally increase their ability to engage across difference, even in tense conversations. So we know that you won't necessarily jump into the hardest conversation or into the longest bridge, right? We talk about short bridges also. So maybe it's a bridge with someone you love that you have a disagreement on something. And then eventually you can get to someone you don't know that you have a big disagreement on a policy issue, right? So like thinking of it as short and long bridges, and when might you be ready to engage in that long bridge, and understanding that it is truly like exercising. It is a muscle that can be worked out so that you can be prepared to have those harder conversations when the time comes.
Yeah, I love this. It's kind of like basic training for next level humans.
Yes.
So is there kind of I love that a lot. So is there a link, or where can I send people to find this?
Absolutely. We have a tiny URL that is circulating, but let me tell you the tiny URL.
Yeah, I just love this idea of starting, with this not having to be heavy lifting. You know what I also like, Juliana? I also like that it's right around election time, because I do think this is the most important time to do this work and to get these skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely. So our tiny URL is 7-day challenge 24.
7-day challenge. Yeah.
24. Yeah. 7, number 7, day with caps, challenge with C caps, and 24. I'm happy to pop it in the chat and to make it available in show notes afterwards as well.
Yeah, 100%. I'll put it in the show notes for sure. I appreciate you. So Juliana, any further? First of all, thank you for your work. From my perspective, these are the organizations that I really want to. The Greater Good Science Center. Thank you for your work there. Thank you for helping translate all this science for us. Thank you for bringing simple ways for us to just be better humans and connect. And is there any other thing that you want to say or leave us with?
I just want to say that we can do this, right? Like in this moment of anxiety and stress and division, it's hard to forget that we can do this. And I just want to leave people with the idea that this is possible, that we have seen people do this across some of the most complex divides, and really walk away not changing their position on the issue, but changing how they perceive the other person and feeling an enormous relief from that. And that's what we're inviting you to do. We're not changing anyone's perspective on issues. We are changing how we feel about others, and we are connecting at a deeper level with others, and we are feeling better about ourselves, and we are feeling better about the polarization and hatred because we are doing something about it.
Yeah, I love it. I think this work is so important. Thank you again, Juliana Tafur. Thank you for being here. Go ahead and hang on the line. I'm going to shut down the record. Just make sure everything uploads. But for all of you listening, thank you so much for hanging out with us, and we will see you at the next show.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Next Level Human podcast with Dr. Jade, Teta. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe and consider leaving a review. You make the biggest difference when you pass on your lessons and inspire others. That's why reviews like this are so powerful. Your words may be the only ones that resonate for someone else. Please remember the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only. Always consult your personal physician or therapist before making any lifestyle changes. And finally, thank you for who you are in the world and the difference you make.